Good morning. It's a truly joyful feast that we celebrate today. By the time we get to the end of this little explanation, hopefully we'll understand that celebrating this feast is, in fact, celebrating in anticipation that which we all hope for. And in seeing it manifest in the Blessed Virgin Mary, we have all the more reason to hope that what God has already done for one of us, He can do for the rest of us. Right? And what we celebrate today, then, is the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary. It's the second, the penultimate, the second to last picture here. Mary being assumed into heaven, body and soul. Now, it's already enough for some people. They just can't fathom Mary being immaculately conceived, perfect and without sin. They can't imagine Mary being inviolate. They can't imagine Mary having a unique relationship with her Son by which she intercedes for us, nor that the Lord gives her to us as mother, nor that she shares with Him in His passion and a death like His in her sorrow, such that she becomes a co-redeemer with Him. For some people, that's already too much. But what we celebrate today is that last step. Mary, the new Eve, goes to where the new Adam is. Mary, the one who is drawn into a relationship of obedience to God, similar to that of Jesus, by which the original disobedience of Adam is undone, and the original disobedience of Eve, similarly undone. That Ark of the covenant, which bore into the world the covenant itself. Take this, all of you, this is my body, take this and drink, this is my blood, of the new covenant, is restored to its rightful place in the center of the temple. Right? We see all of these mysteries that were played out in this banal human existence, which is so dramatic, but we just can't appreciate or see it. We see it played out and found its terminus in the Assumption and ultimately in the coronation of the Blessed Virgin Mary. So I want to go through a couple of those titles and the way that Mary works, so that we can see beyond a shadow of a doubt, that it is not only fitting, but it is necessary. That unlike Clare or Francis, whose relics we have in this world and continue to venerate today, there are no such relics of the Blessed Virgin Mary. In fact, there's more of Jesus around than there is Mary, because He leaves us His body, blood, soul, and divinity in the Eucharist. But there is no bodily remain of the Blessed Virgin Mary, because she has already had done for her in anticipation what will be done for us in the end when the trumpets blast and the dead are called forth to be reunited to their resurrected bodies. So Mary is, first of all, the Ark of the Covenant. We'll sort of take this in progression here, or in logical order. Mary's the Ark of the Covenant. She was built in her mother's womb, Anne and Joachim, in a similar fashion, in a similar dimension and specification, as the Ark of the Covenant was very specifically given the dimensions by God to Moses. Build this ark. It needs to be like this. It needs to be. Ultimately, what God is saying is this ark needs to be perfect. Perfectly to specifications. The specifications to perform what I want it to perform. What's the Ark of the Covenant do? It carries around in it the signs of the Old Covenant. The showbread, the manna, right? The stone tablets of the law of Moses, and the staff, right? Of the lineage, the patronage, the promise of fidelity from one generation to the next. The perpetuity of the covenant, right? That ark carries that around, and it's reverenced, it's revered as if it were the covenant itself. Now, Mary, as we see here, is very intimately identified, very specifically identified as the covenant. In the temple of God's temple in heaven was open, and the ark of His covenant could be seen in the temple, a woman clothed with the sun. There's a clever break that I think is malicious by the Protestants who invented the the chapter and verse address system for the Bible. It's a fantastic way of finding things. I'm not criticizing the chapter and verse, but there's a chapter break put in there, right at that transition point, the pivot point where we're talking about the temple and the ark, and then the woman clothed in the sun. It's artificial. It's not meant to be there. If you read it straight through, it's very clear that the ark of the covenant is being united to the sign appeared in the sky, woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet. We see it here, right? Mary appeared in the form of this image on the tilma in Our Lady of in Guadalupe, a woman clothed in the sun with the stars, standing on the moon. It's very clear that just as Jesus is the Son of Man in the revelation of the book of Daniel and in Amos, so also Mary is the woman clothed with the sun and the stars, standing on the moon in the book of Revelation. What that means then is she is the Ark of the Covenant. John is pointing this out. Remember, John lives with Mary. He knows her really well. He understands these things more profoundly than even St. Paul. Right? And so he's articulating this. Mary is the Ark who bears for us, who brings for us into the world the promised covenant that lasts forever, the new covenant. The one who is the true bread from heaven, the one who is the fulfillment of the law and the prophets, the one who is the king of the city of David who will last forever. There's no longer a need for a continued kingship or a continued priesthood because the kingship and the priesthood of Jesus never passes away. What was merely a foreshadowing in the Old Covenant of the Ark of the Covenant and the items of the covenant are manifest and made real, true, and effective in Mary and in Jesus as the unity between the Ark and the covenant itself, the fleshy substance of the covenant, receiving that flesh from Mary, who's the Ark. You can't separate these two. You can't separate them in their origin into the drama of our human world, and you can't separate them in death, because death, ultimately, because of Jesus' victory, frankly doesn't mean very much. It doesn't really have any power. Certainly not any power to separate what God has bound to himself. And by our baptism, we're bound to him. And in that binding, which is what the word religion means, in our religion, in our Christian religion, we do not need to fear death because we are bound to him. And he is alive, and he has transcended, put death under his feet as the last enemy. He's already conquered it. We also have Mary understood by the church fathers from the very beginning as the new Eve. As Adam, through his disobedience, and Eve, through her participation with Adam, brought sin into the world, so by Jesus, the new Adam's obedience to the Father undoes the disobedience of Adam. But how is it appropriate? It's not appropriate to separate the unity and the companionship, the co-workerness of Mary from Jesus any more than it's appropriate to separate Adam and Eve's responsibility with one another for bringing into the world death and sin. And so Mary is credited with Jesus as being obedient to the Father and working together to bring about a restoration of obedience and thereby reconciliation of humanity to the Father. The new Adam and the new Eve, together, co-workers, accomplishing the great task that the Father sent Jesus to accomplish. Remember, this is the ordinate and subordinate appropriate relationship, right? That Paul talks about in marriage. Wives, be subordinate to your husbands. Do you think Mary is oppressed by Jesus? Does anybody think Mary is oppressed by Jesus? If you do, raise your hand. We'll talk about that. She's not. But she is subordinate. Her task, her cooperation is in assistance to the task that the Father gave Jesus. right? And Jesus says, as Adam said, it's not good for me to be alone. I need a helpmate. And Jesus finds that in his immaculate mother, Mary, who, like him, is not touched by the stain of sin, because of him, is not touched by the stain of sin, and can cooperate with him in his great task, great mission of undergoing a passion so cruel that even God himself kneels down in a garden and says, please don't make this happen. That so many years earlier, when Mary presented Jesus in the temple, and Simeon took Jesus in his arms and said, Lord, now you may let your servant go in peace. Your word has been fulfilled. He prophesied that even Mary's heart too would be pierced by a lance. Mary is a co-sufferer with Jesus. At her word, she could have stopped the torture of her son. She could have said, son, that's enough, be done. And what would he have done? He would have stopped because he is obedient to his mother. Mary, in her intimate relationship with Jesus, in this obedience that she knows she has over her son, never needs to do anything overt, but rather in a subordinate, covert way. Mary works in the background, saying to servants at a wedding, just do whatever he tells you. He knows what I want him to do. And he'll do what I want. I don't even need to ask. Son, they're out of wine. Woman, what does that mean to me? And there, that reference of woman is not disrespectful. He's calling her that Eve, that new Eve, woman. Adam calls Eve woman. He sees her as woman, his other half. And so Jesus says to Mary at the beginning of setting his foot to the road that will lead him to the cross and her to her torture, he says, woman, what does this mean to me? You know what this means. And rather than saying, Jesus, do it, I said so because I'm your mama, she just turns to the servant and says, do whatever he says. In this way, she shows herself not only the new Eve, which is to say co-redeemer with Jesus, she cooperates with Jesus as a co-redeemer in his great work of redemption. But she also shows herself our most necessary intercessor. That from the greatest needs of our lives, salvation, to the most mundane, I ran out of booze, she will intercede for what we truly need. And because she's so good at that, Jesus gives her to us on the cross as our mother. Woman, behold your son. Son, behold your mother. I mean, Mary is everywhere that Jesus is. Imagine that moment on the road where Jesus meets his grieved mother. In Mel Gibson's Passion play, which is phenomenal, Jesus falls. Mary runs to him, and they're both of them on the ground looking at each other. And he says, see, mother, I make all things new. Just as he was sort of encouraged in the garden by the ministry of the angels, so also he probably needed to encourage her. Mother, don't tell me to quit. We have to do this. And so, as an expression of Jesus' triumph for humanity, for all of humanity, he takes with him at the moment of her death, in the manner that he will call all of us in the end, Mary to himself, body and soul in heaven, as a proof, a testimony for all of us that this is what he will do for us. This is what we hope in. I believe in the resurrection of the body, we say in the creed. That's what that means. It shouldn't surprise us. It's not unreal for someone to have their body in heaven, because we're all going to have that one day. She just has it a little bit earlier, and guess what else she got early too? The graces of the cross, so that she could remain immaculate and be the Ark of the Covenant. Mary just gets everything before us, so that we can see that what God says he can do, because he's done it. and we can have the reason to hope in that. So what we celebrate today is nothing at all surprising when we understand all that Mary is leading up to this moment of her Assumption. That she who was incorruptible from the beginning, who is immaculate, who is inviolate, who is ever virgin, that she who is the new Eve, she who is the Ark of the Covenant, she who is the Mother of God, she who is his helpmate, his co-redeemer, our intercessor, that she did not taste the corruption of death, but upon her death was assumed as our promise that we hope in the resurrection of the body, that she herself is made perfect, inviolate, Queen of Heaven, body and soul, this day. And this is what we celebrate.